In this lesson, I'm going to introduce you to Paint Tools. To follow along, open up Working Files, go to After Effects Projects, and then start up 0901 Paint Tools. After Effects has 4 paint tools, and some folks may disagree and say it has only 3, but I like to put 4 paint tools in this group because all 4 of these guys up here all have similar characteristics. The 4 paint tools are the Brush tool, the Clone Stamp tool, the Eraser tool, and the Roto brush tool. And some folks may not want to characterize the Roto brush tool as a paint tool, but it behaves very much like these other 3 here, so I'm lumping them all together. So what are those shared characteristics? Well, the first one is that they all work inside the layer panel, not the comp panel, but the layer panel. And that can be a little disconcerting because in the layer panel, you see only the layer you're working on. You don't see how it relates to other layers in the comp. But there are ways around that. Let me show you how that works. To open up the layer panel, you simply double-click on a layer, and that layer shows up inside the layer panel. But now you can't see the composition. Here is the composition panel over there, and here's the layer panel. So how do you see the composition panel? Well, typically folks just take this thing and just drag it over to another frame, and now you can see both at once. That's kind of the quick and easy way to do it, but there's also a workspace that lets you do this and has another nice feature as well. Let me just switch over to that. So I'm going to go back here and reset my standard workspace to go back to where I started. And then I'm going to switch to the Paint workspace. I'll click on this and go to Paint. And there is the comp panel there. There's the layer panel. And in addition, we have the brushes and the paint panels over here. And you need the brushes and the paint panel whenever you are working with the paint tools. So that's convenient there. What's missing is the project panel. You don't see it here. It's gone when you switch to this workspace, which I think is kind of inconvenient. So I'd like to bring it back by going to Window, Project down here. That's going to put it side by side, not exactly where I want this, but I'll drag this over here, and now we're back to that point where we got the project panel as well. Okay, let me click through these 4 tools. I'll click the brush tool there, and notice what happens. When you click on it, its characteristics show up over here in the paint and the brushes panel. Now just take a quick look at them and just see how they look and just in general. I'm going to switch now to the Clone Stamp tool, and it'll look different. Every tool takes on the previously used version of that tool, so you can't switch from the brush tool to the Clone Stamp tool and expect to see the same things over here. Same thing when we go to the eraser. That'll change too. When we go to the rotor brush tool, that'll change as well. So these characteristics are related to the last time you used that specific tool. Let me go back to the brush tool. Another characteristic of these tools is that they are effects. They are not really tools per se. They are effects, and as you apply them, they show up inside the effects control panel. And they also show up as effects down here inside the layers. Let me open up the layer here for a second. Right now you see just the transform property group. I've got the brush selected. I've got red for its color. It's pretty hard edged here. I'm just going to draw something. Now take a look at the layer. We suddenly have an effects property group. That's because we added the paint effect. Open that up. There's the paint effect. The eraser, the clone stamp, and the brush tools are all paint effects. If I open up that disclosure triangle, you see that there's the brush. Let me lift this thing up a little bit so you can see a little more. So we did a brush. That's the brush stroke for the paint effect. Open that up, and the brush stroke has several properties. Open up the stroke options, and these stroke options more or less match what you see over here. So no matter what you pick here, you can change this later. You could even animate it later. So that's really a great thing. Another thing about paint is that it's a vector-based object. If you work in Photoshop and work with paint there, it's pixel-based, which means if you blow it up, it gets kind of fuzzy looking. But if you blow this guy up, if you expand it, it will not get fuzzy. It's vector-based and always retains its original characteristics. Let me make it larger by closing this and going to the transform property group and changing its scale, and watch this. It stays sharp no matter how tight we get on it like that. Here it's 650% or something, and look at that. It's still as sharp as it was in the beginning. That's because it's a vector-based object. And what may look like a line to you is in fact a collection of dots. Let me show you how the paint strokes actually look. I'll open up the stroke options here, and I'm going to change the spacing. Increase the spacing. Look at this. This is what a paint stroke really is. It's just a bunch of dots. Each of these dots matches this paint stroke over there. It's just that they overlap if you have the spacing down less than, let's say, 90% or so. Now you begin to see, oh, okay, it's really not a bunch of dots. They're all just put together, and it makes it look like a stroke. What's cool about these dots is that you can animate them. You can also change their color and other characteristics as well. So it's vector-based, and it's made up of a bunch of dots. Another cool feature of the paint tools is that they create paths. Let me close this down a bit here. You notice there's the path option here. This lets you morph from one stroke to another. So if you have a stroke like this, you can morph to another one. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to change to a different brush color. And before I paint, I want to click off this, because if I paint with this thing selected, it'll replace it. So I'll click away so it's not selected. I'm going to change the color here to something else. Make it blue. Click OK. Make the hardness a little less hard. Let me just pull this thing down a little bit now. Pull this thing up a little bit. You can see the hardness there. I'll drop it down a bit so it's a softer edge to it. And now I'll paint something blue. All right. What's cool about this is that I can morph from one to the other. So I can open up this brush here. I can click on the path keyframe toggle animation switch. Go in a little ways like this. Click on brush 2, which is that blue squirrely thing there. Click on it. Copy that keyframe and go down here to this path and paste, and it'll morph from one to the other. To go from, look on the left-hand side, you'll see how the red one morphs from one to the other. If I turn off brush 2, you'll see it acting all by itself. And notice how it's not moving inside the layer panel, but will jump here when I finish this. The comp panel gives you the actual animation. The layer panel has to wait until you're done, and it jumps. So we go back here, and it goes back to the beginning. Notice when we morphed, we didn't change color, we just changed the shape. So you can morph the shape, and then you can keyframe the color anyways. I'll turn that guy back on. There we go. Let me show you the other paint tools here. I'll click on the eraser. We can erase either the paint only or the paint and the layer. Let me just erase here. I'll show you what we've got here. Down here it says erase paint only, so I'll erase just the paint. Or I can change this to layer source and paint, and then it's actually erasing the entire white solid, revealing what's transparent beneath here. Now, if I were to switch off transparency, you'd see the background color of this comp, which happens to be red. Right now I'm erasing to the background. But if you see the real thing that's going on over here, I'm erasing to the next layer down. The next layer down is that photograph of those 3 girls jumping there. There you go. So that's the difference between the layer side of things and the comp side of things. Let me try out the clone stamp tool by going to a different layer. Go up here and close down this solid layer. Go to this shot of the girls jumping and turn off the eyeball. The clone stamp tool is used to select pixels from one place and paste them someplace else. Open that up into the layer panel. Let's say I want to make this girl disappear, which I'm going to show you how to do in an upcoming lesson. I would switch over to the clone stamp tool. I'd sample an area here. Then I could paint her away. Something like that. So I'll explain how to do this in an upcoming lesson. And then finally, there is the Roto brush tool. Open that up in the layer panel, even though we can see it in the comp panel. Roto brush tool lets us select areas that we might not be able to select otherwise because they're moving. So I'm going to select the Roto brush tool here. You can see it has brush characteristics just like the other paint tools do. And then I would paint here in the scene, and I would select perhaps that guy's white shirt. And I'm going to explain how to do that in an upcoming lesson. So there you go. That's a basic overview of the 4 paint tools.